The world had ended in 17 seconds. Beneath 3 stories of shattered concrete, Mira Patel cradled her daughter's limp body, her own breath growing shallow. The rescuers' shouts above were fading. The light was dying. Then, a sound cut through the crushing silence. Not human, not machinery. A dog's bark, relentless, unyielding. Claws scraped frantically at the rubble above them. Closer, closer. Somewhere in the wreckage, a stray who had lost everything was digging toward them, as if he already knew their names.
The morning of the earthquake began like any other in the quiet town of Briarwood, Oregon. The first pale fingers of dawn crept over the snow-capped Cascade Mountains, painting the sleepy town in soft hues of pink and gold. A gentle mist hovered above the Umpqua River that wound through the valley, and the crisp autumn air carried the scent of pine needles and wood smoke from early risers' chimneys. In apartment 3B of the Briarwood Terrace complex, 4-year-old Priya Patel was already wide awake, her small hands pressed against the cool glass of her bedroom window as she watched a family of robins hopping across the dew-kissed grass below. The birds pecked at the ground, their russet breasts puffed up against the morning chill, completely unaware of the cataclysm about to befall their peaceful world. Down the hall, Priya's mother Mira moved about the kitchen with practiced ease, the rich, comforting aromas of masala chai and toasted cumin seeds filling the small apartment. The radio played an old Hindi love song that reminded her of her childhood in Mumbai, and she hummed along absently as she packed Rohan's lunch pail, extra rotis today, knowing how hard he worked at the construction site. The ordinary morning rhythms continued as Priya's father Rohan kissed them both goodbye, his work boots leaving faint traces of drywall dust on the linoleum as he headed out for an early job across town. None of them knew these were their last moments of normalcy, that in exactly 17 minutes, the world as they knew it would be irrevocably shattered. When the earthquake hit at precisely 7:03 a.m., it came without warning or mercy. The ground didn't just shake, it convulsed violently like a living thing possessed, the seismic waves rippling through the valley with terrifying force. Dishes cascaded from shelves in a cacophony of shattering porcelain, bookshelves toppled forward like dominoes, and the walls themselves seemed to breathe in and out with grotesque, unnatural movements. Mira had just enough time to scream Priya's name before the ceiling above the kitchen collapsed in an explosion of plaster, splintered wood, and jagged electrical wiring. The last thing she saw before the world went black was Priya's terrified face frozen in a silent scream, her small arms outstretched in helpless supplication as the walls between them crumbled into nothingness. Across town at the Briarwood Animal Shelter, the German Shepherd mix known only as Kennel Number 47 erupted into frantic barking as the first tremors rocked the building's foundation. The dog the staff had privately nicknamed Rusty for his reddish-brown coat had been at the shelter for nearly 5 months, longer than any other resident by several weeks. His original owner, an elderly mechanic named Walter Hines, had passed away peacefully in his sleep 8 months prior, leaving the devoted dog waiting endlessly by the front door for a master who would never return. Normally calm and withdrawn, Rusty now threw himself against his kennel door with uncharacteristic urgency as the shelter's cinderblock walls groaned in protest against the seismic onslaught. When a particularly violent tremor split the western wall near the back exit, sending chunks of concrete tumbling to the floor in clouds of gray dust, Rusty didn't hesitate. He bolted through the gaping crack and into the chaos beyond, driven by some primal instinct stronger than self-preservation. The destruction in Briarwood streets was nothing short of apocalyptic. Power lines danced and spat angry blue sparks as they swung from broken poles like macabre jump ropes. Pavement had buckled into jagged, surreal peaks that resembled a frozen ocean, and the air smelled of ruptured natural gas lines, pulverized drywall, and something more primal, the metallic tang of fear. Rusty moved with single-minded determination through the devastation, his powerful nose working overtime as he wove around piles of debris that had once been family homes and local businesses. Some deep instinct beyond human understanding or canine training, pulled him inexorably toward the remains of the Briarwood Terrace apartments, his muscles taut with purpose even as aftershocks continued to rattle the broken town. Beneath 3 stories of collapsed building material, Mira Patel drifted in and out of consciousness like a drowning woman fighting against a relentless tide. A massive support beam had her legs pinned at an unnatural angle, the pain so overwhelming that her nervous system had mercifully begun shutting down certain receptors. But even in her semi-conscious state, her arms remained locked around Priya in a protective embrace that no force of nature could break, the little girl's shallow breaths puffing weakly against her neck. "Stay awake, Janu," Mira whispered through cracked, dust-coated lips, though she could feel her own awareness fading in and out like a weak radio signal. Somewhere in the distant darkness above them, she could hear muffled shouts and the occasional mechanical whine of heavy equipment, but the sound seemed to come from another world entirely, separated from their tomb of rubble by an impossible gulf. Then, cutting through the haze of pain and encroaching oblivion like a lighthouse beam through fog, a new sound emerged. Sharp, insistent, unmistakable. A dog's bark, so close it made Priya stir weakly in her arms. Then another bark, followed by frantic scratching against concrete that sent tiny avalanches of dust cascading down around them. Up on the surface, Rusty was digging like a creature possessed by divine purpose. His claws tore against broken concrete and twisted rebar until they bled freely, his normally golden coat now uniformly gray with pulverized drywall and ash. When the first rescue team arrived minutes later, drawn by the sound of his relentless barking, they found the determined shepherd mix refusing to budge from his spot despite their shouted warnings about aftershocks and unstable debris fields. "That damn dog's going to get himself killed in this mess," muttered Fire Chief Daniel Reyes as he approached the precarious pile, his boots crunching over broken glass and splintered wood. But when Rusty turned to face him, his intelligent, whiskey-colored eyes locked onto Daniel's with an almost human intensity before returning to his desperate excavation. Something about the animal's behavior, the focused urgency in his movements, the way he alternated between digging and looking pointedly at the rescuers, made Daniel pause. He signaled his team to halt their search of a nearby collapsed hardware store. "Bring the thermal camera over here," he called out, his voice tight with sudden hope. "I think this mutt's onto something we're missing." The next hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos and nerve-wracking tension. Rescue workers carefully stabilized sections of the wreckage with hydraulic braces while Rusty paced nearby like an expectant father, whining softly whenever progress slowed or attention seemed to waver. When they finally broke through to the small, miraculously intact pocket where Mira and Priya were trapped, the sight stole the breath from every hardened first responder present. Myra's body formed a perfect protective arch over her daughter, her arms still locked in position despite her unconscious state like some modern-day pieta carved from dust and blood rather than marble. Little Priya, though frighteningly pale and covered in a fine gray powder that made her look like a ghost child, was awake, her huge brown eyes blinking rapidly against the sudden invasion of light after hours of oppressive darkness. When those eyes landed on Rusty's scruffy face peering anxiously through the gap, she let out a weak but unmistakable giggle that brought tears to more than one rescuer's eyes. "Doggy," she croaked, stretching one tiny, grime-streaked hand toward him with innocent trust. The moment Rusty carefully extended his muzzle to lick her fingers would later be immortalized in a photograph that circled the globe, appearing on front pages from New York to New Delhi. But in that raw, unguarded instant there were no cameras, just a trembling child and the scarred stray dog who had refused to give up on her when all hope seemed lost. The medical team worked with practiced efficiency to stabilize them both before extraction. Priya's vital signs were surprisingly strong given the ordeal, but Mira had lost significant blood from her crushed legs and was slipping in and out of consciousness as shock took its toll. As they loaded her into the waiting ambulance, her hands suddenly shot out with surprising strength, her fingers weakly tangling in Rusty's matted fur. "Don't let him go," she whispered to the wide-eyed paramedic before the darkness claimed her again, her arm falling limp against the gurney. In the weeks that followed, Briarwood would tally its devastating losses: 37 confirmed dead, over 100 seriously injured, and nearly half the town's buildings damaged beyond repair. The elementary school gone. The historic downtown theater reduced to a skeleton of broken beams. The community center where generations had celebrated weddings and birthdays now just a memory. But amid the overwhelming tragedy emerged stories of hope and resilience that would become legend, none more compelling than that of the stray dog who led rescuers to the patters against all odds. Rusty became something of a local celebrity in the recovery period, though he seemed utterly indifferent to the attention and camera flashes. The shelter was inundated with adoption offers from as far away as New York and Los Angeles, including one from a famous movie producer who promised the dog would be the next Rin Tin Tin, but all were politely declined. The Patels had already made their intentions abundantly clear. When Priya was finally discharged from the hospital, with a bright pink cast on her left arm and Rusty's name scrawled across it in her favorite glitter markers, her first stop wasn't home. It was the shelter to make things official, the little girl refusing to leave until the adoption papers were signed and Rusty's weathered old collar was replaced with a shiny new one bearing their address. The years that followed were filled with small, ordinary miracles that somehow felt extraordinary because they'd nearly been lost forever. Rusty patiently endured Priya dressing him in ridiculous costumes for her elaborate tea parties, his long-suffering expression as he wore a tattered princess crown becoming a family joke. He learned to recognize the particular hitch in Myra's breathing that signaled an oncoming panic attack about enclosed spaces, pressing his solid weight against her legs until her breathing steadied and the tremors subsided. When baby Arjun joined the family 2 years after the quake, Rusty appointed himself the boy's personal guardian from the moment they brought him home from the hospital, sleeping beneath the crib and sounding the alarm at the first hint of distress with a sharp bark that brought Mira running. But his most profound impact was less visible to the outside world. Every Tuesday without fail, Rusty accompanied Mira to her grueling physical therapy sessions, his calm presence making the painful exercises somehow more bearable. He lay patiently for hours while children at Priya's school took turns reading to him, his quiet acceptance giving shy students the confidence to find their voices. And on the anniversary of the earthquake each year, he could be found sitting quietly at the town memorial, a living reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope persists in ways we can't always anticipate. As Priya would tell the reporter doing a 10th anniversary piece on the quake, her now teenage voice steady but her fingers unconsciously twisting Rusty's collar in her lap. Rusty didn't just save our lives that day. He taught us how to live them, really live them, not just go through the motions. And on difficult nights when memories of darkness threatened to overwhelm, when Myra's leg ached with the changing weather or Priya startled at loud noises, there he was, warm and steady beside them, his rhythmic breathing a tangible reminder that from even the most broken places can emerge bonds too strong for any disaster to break.